Okay, in terms of the stuff, I guess finally some good news. Last class. Deadline's coming up, exam 2, quizzes part 3, June 17th, deadline of 5, so today, end of day, 11 to 9 p.m. Exam number 3, covering part 3, deadline of 5 is June 17th, end of day. Exam 4, quizzes part 4, exam 5, deadline 5, June 18th. For the paper, the half credit deadline still remains, June 18th, end of day, 11:59 p.m. And the grades will go in on June 19th. Now, in terms of like the grade stuff, in terms of like to see where you are in the class and decide if you need to bond or not, here's how it goes. The overall grade gives you your real grade in the class at this moment with two critical assumptions. One is anything you haven't done, treat it as a 0, and so if you haven't done the final yet or anything you haven't done yet, it's a 0. That's why if you look at your overall grade, it may look not so great because it's, again, treating anything you haven't done as a 0. Second thing is that for the quizzes, the best 10 count, for the exams, best 4 out of 5, for the paper, and it's already doing that. So going back to the original point, if you've only done, say, 2 exams at this point, waiting to do 3, 4, and 5, you'll have the 2 exams, but it'll pull in 2 zeros to average in there, so it'll look bad. And so the overall grade, be sure to check it on a web browser, not the mobile app, to make sure that it displays correctly. Before deciding not to do anything, good idea to send an email saying, this is what I think I got, do I really have this? And I'll reply back saying, you got that, or no, you don't got that. In terms of percentages, quizzes are 30%, exams 40%, paper 30%. Before pressing on to the new stuff, any stuff about the stuff to be or old stuff that needs more stuff?
I have a question in regards to the survey quiz you have at the end for extra credit. If majority of the class being completed as you stated in your directions, but if you did the quizzes and you got perfect 10, can that 5 points go towards something else?
Unfortunately, no, it just counts as a quiz. So if you do have perfect quiz score, if you've got 10 perfect 5s, then sadly it won't help you. But if you have less than 10 5s, then it would help you.
Okay. Another question. Does the syllabus quiz count?
Yeah, it counts. Well, it's one of all the quizzes, regardless of in the class, like which section or where they come from. It pulls out of those. So if the syllabus quiz is one of your best 10, then it counts. If it's not one of your best 10, it gets dropped off.
Okay.
So there's 20, I think there's like 26 or 27 quizzes, and the best 10 of those count. And it's already set, your quiz average is your best 10 quizzes pulled out of all of those. So the grade already shows, like with all the best 4 quizzes, best 4 exams, best 10 quizzes, and of course the paper.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, our final thing is we're looking at liberty. We looked at, on the extreme right, Benito Mussolini talking about fascism, that is the state decides what liberty people have, and people are only allowed liberty that is either harmless or tolerable. Let's talk about the state. Bless you. Then we move to John Stuart Mill, looking at a more liberal view, which is based on the principle of harm. The idea being that unless what one is doing is harming others, then a person has a right to not be restricted in that activity. And now we turn for our ending thing, the most left, from our good dead friend Emma Goldman, talking about anarchism. Quick background for her, born in 1869, died in 1940, and of course still dead today. She had led quite an interesting life, emigrated to the United States. While here, she was involved in such things as encouraging the labor movement, saying famously or infamously for the workers to ask for work. If they cannot provide work, ask for bread. If they cannot provide work or bread, take bread. She also was involved in the assassination plot against President McKinley, and she was arrested quite a bit, one time including handing out literature promoting birth control. And back in those days, even talking about birth control was considered a criminal offense. Eventually she was booted out of the United States and wrote a fair amount of stuff about anarchism. Bless you. Now, anarchism, interesting political view, as I mentioned before, it kind of dominated the fear back in the time period, kind of like the terrorism is today. Now, anarchism, put very concisely, is this view. a person who's an anarchist believes that there should be no government, no political authority, no police, no prisons, none of that stuff. Now, it's not an advocation of chaos and disorder. So if you're thinking, like Mad Max Fury Road, or thinking Lord of the Flies, that's not what they advocate. They don't advocate chaos and madness, they advocate anarchy, a lack of political authority. Now, there are, in general, two sorts of approaches to anarchy in terms of bringing it about. One approach was taken by our good dead friend, Henry David Thoreau. He's the Walden Pond guy. And he argued for civil disobedience, which of course was picked up by a guy named Gandhi, used in India, came back across the United States, used by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., helping contribute to the civil rights movement. And so some anarchists were peaceful, bringing it about by civil disobedience. Other anarchists, though, were violent. They believed you could bring about anarchy by the use of the bomb, the gun, that kind of stuff. Now, she begins by looking at two objections to anarchism. One, it is impractical. And one argument is that if we were to have a system without any political authority, everything would fall to pieces. And so one standard argument is impracticality. A second argument is that it stands for violence and destruction, which, given Goldman's view, would be a reasonable objection, because you did advocate the use of force and violence. Now, in terms of replying to these, the first objection is impracticality. And it does have a certain, appeal. Because you might ask, imagine what it'd be like if we took away all government. We don't have, Washington, we don't have the legislature in Tallahassee, we don't have a, police system, we don't have all the trappings of the state. And normally think of that as like a state of chaos. If you look at a book you no doubt had to read in high school, Lord of the Flies, which illustrates what is supposed to happen when you don't have government. Everything goes to madness, and pretty soon people are killing each other and worshiping, a pig head. Or you can look at other, post-apocalyptic scenarios. It's all supposed to be awful. And so there is that concern that it may be just impractical, that everything would decay into chaos, madness, and destruction. Now, Wilde's reply is this. Citing our good dead friend Oscar Wilde, she notes that what people regard as practical is basically what is being done now, or what can be done under the current conditions. And so the claim is that anarchism actually is practical. Now, of course, that is an empirical question. One could say, can things actually work without government? And historically, we could point to examples like, well, what happened to Yugoslavia when it fell apart? What happened to Somalia when it fell apart? What happened to Iraq and Syria when they fell apart? And they fell into blood, chaos, and fire. Now, one would reply back by saying, well, the problem in places like Yugoslavia, Somalia, and Syria, and Iraq is not a lack of government, it's that you have too many governments fighting each other. You still have governments. You still have ISIS has got a government, etc. So that's one potential reply. Reply to the second objection is this. To turn to an example from a movie, there's a classic Arnold Schwarzenegger film called True Lies. And he plays a spy, and his wife asked him if he's killed anybody. And he gives the classic reply, yes, but they're all bad people. And so her reply is essentially that. The idea being that, yes, true, they're killing people, but they're killing all the right people. Which in one hand is a pretty horrifying response. Yeah, we're killing people, but they're the people that need killing. But of course, it's pretty much how we function in the world anyways. We kill a lot of people. And so that's a reply to those two objections, to the impracticality and the violence objection. So, what is anarchism all about? Well, what it promises this, a new social order. And it rests on the premise, their criticism is that all governments rest on violence. So governments are bad, and we need a new social order. Again, a critical point about anarchism is they're not advocating for chaos. They're not saying let's have chaos, blood, fire, and destruction, madness forever. They do believe in social order. They just believe that you should not have the coercive institutions of government. And they claim, in support of their view, that the individual instinct and the social instincts are not, foreign to each other. In other words, they try to argue that this can work, which is a very, practical question. Could that work? And in terms of trying to sell it, they claim it's, a good and wonderful thing. Now, just like when you're trying to sell anything, one thing you want to do, of course, as a practical matter, is show how awful the alternatives are and how bad it is and how wonderful and wondrous it is what you're selling. And whether you're selling soap, kiwis, the fruit or the bird, apps, a presidential candidate, same sort of thing. You want to show how awful the competition is and how awesome your product is. So, what's the motivation for anarchy? What they claim is this. The anarchists, although they do differ in their particular views, claim we face all kinds of awful stuff. And the main thing they promise is to liberate us from what is oppressing us. That's their claim. So what supposedly oppresses us? Well, interestingly, or boringly enough, the things that are generally considered very valuable and good in the West, which is one of the reasons why anarchists are considered so threatening, because what they regard as the problem are three things that people tend to regard as really good things. Namely, religion, property, and government. Although people tend to be more critical of government today. But in most countries, especially the United States, people are very wary of criticism of religion. Anything that attacks property is seen as really bad. But of course we do have criticism of, government. So what's their deal against religion? Well, their claim is this. The view is that it's used essentially as a tool to dominate and control people. It's the same sort of thing that Marx, claimed. Marx famously claimed that religion is the opiate of the masses, which he said, of course, before television came out, probably changed his mind. But the view is that religion is a very, domineering sort of thing. So, while not all anarchists are atheists, there is the typical movement in anarchism against organized religion, because they regard it as being used as a tool to control and exploit people. Now, you don't have to be an atheist to be an anarchist. There are people who are not, but that's kind of a common view. So religion is seen as bad. And what they promise to do is get rid of that, which, as you might imagine, would put those sorts of anarchists at odds against all religious authorities and believers. Now, their second opponent is property. Now, they're not against, some might say, that seems ridiculous. Are they against, people having, food and toothbrushes and cars and, cameras and stuff? Now, what they mean by property is not that stuff. They're not against people, having clothing or shoes, but they're talking about property in sort of the broad sense. Essentially, the ownership of, the means and modes of production, to use some Marxist jargon. And they think that this is dominion of our needs, and anarchism offers to give us economic freedom. Now, what could that mean? Well, there's a famous quote from an anarchist called Proudhon, who said famously, seemingly contradictorily, that property is theft, or property is robbery. Which seems like an odd thing, because robbery is taking people's property, so it'd be saying that, property is taking people's property, which seems weird. Now, what he actually meant is this. It's a criticism if you follow, politics, today and all, and you get criticism from the left, you'll hear kind of echoes of this. The idea being that there is, monopoly on ownership of things, which puts people at a severe disadvantage. Some people today talk about how, the, financial institutions have a huge advantage over us, about how monopolies like cable companies have huge advantages over us, about how, if you're just a person trying to get a job, you're at the mercy of the corporations, and that's, the anarchists push that to more extremes. And they think that there's a serious problem because there actually could be plenty for everyone. One thing that anarchists and socialists often claim is that we do have plenty of productivity. That the problem is that the shortfalls and poverty are created, that people do not have to be poor, that it's actually manufactured. And what they claim to do is to free us from that. So what does the anarchists propose to get? Well, basically this. First, they say we're producing a lot of junk, horrible things. And what they want to do, at least in the case of Goldman, is change things around so things are better. They also claim some particular problems with this economic system. One that's very harmful to people, damaging, which is something people may argue today, damaging to health and well-being. It's also, she regards it as being fundamentally unfair, and also, in an interesting look, anticipating today, talks about us being trapped in the service of machines. Now back in her time, it was working like an engine lathe or in a factory, but today we are of course bound to our phones and our computers. They have become our rulers. Hold them, carry them around lovingly, and they tell us what to do all day. So I guess she kind of nailed that one. So what's the anarchist going to do? They say this economic system is really awful, so what do they promise? Well, according to the anarchists, they want to get rid of that system. So a good question would be, so what are we going to do in this future economy? Well, they claim that when we have enough advanced technology, everyone will be able to get enough. You won't need to have this exploitation. Everyone can be well off. When it comes to employment, the claim is that, she's writing again in the past, but her claim is that people usually work jobs they hate, and they're forced to work them, they don't pay very well, and it's all awful and unpleasant. And what the anarchist offers is to get rid of that you would work at what you love doing, and you wouldn't be compelled to work a crappy job just because that's your only alternative between starvation or working crappy jobs. Now, there's a couple obvious questions. One would be a practical one. Would it be possible to have a system that does not have that sort of exploitation? Do we have to have some people working really awful, dangerous jobs for terrible pay in order for the economy to work? Another practical thing is, could people really work at just what they love? Will there not always be the awful crap jobs? I mean, someone's got to clean the toilets, someone's got to make the burgers, someone's got to clean the sewers, someone's got to pick up the garbage, someone's got to work all the jobs that are not super awesome. And pretty much most people don't love cleaning toilets. People don't love, getting the sewers. People don't love making French fries all day. And so one question to be is, could we have a viable economy where people only did what they want and they weren't coerced and compelled, to do the awful jobs? But the anarchists say, we can make that happen, but it's a fair question whether that would be possible or not. So, what they offer us again is freedom from this oppression, or so they claim. And they claim they would be able to bring this about. Again, a very practical question. The third and final factor they consider is the danger posed by the state. So the three main opponents again are religion, property, and the state. So your question would be, what's wrong with government? Now, of course, today, if you follow American politics at all, we've always had, in the United States, some criticism of government. Thoreau, the fellow I mentioned, our good dead friend, was critical of it. He came up with a saying, the government is best, which governs least. And, when he saw the rise of the Tea Party, the conservative movement, they were fairly critical of, the government. And we hear people today, if you follow the multitude of presidential candidates, many of them say they're for small government, less government. And so in some ways they're not anarchists, they're not saying get rid of all government, but they're taking the line that we should have less and less government. And of course the logical conclusion of less government is zero or no government. So what's bad about government, according to the anarchists? Well, the claim is basically that it represses us. It subordinates us, it creates injustice, it is the greatest offense against people, it demands obedience and treasury, basically money from us, and destroys basically humanity. So the claim is the government is a really awful sort of thing. Now again, we see echoes of this in political candidates today running for president. They talk about small government, government getting people's business, getting people's way, and in many ways that's classic anarchism. Now, of course, you won't hear a serious candidate say get rid of all government, but they come pretty close. You know, when we had the government shutdown, they're talking about how this is a good thing, and the candidates are often talking about reducing government more and more. Again, kind of a step towards anarchism. Now, not surprisingly, people do argue in defense of the state, and there are basically 4 arguments that our good dead friend Emma Goldman considers. First, one claim is that it rests on natural laws. The idea that the state is natural. It's the way, natural law theory, it's the way things just are. Secondly, one fairly strong argument in favor of the state is that it's used to maintain social order and harmony. Thirdly, there's the crime-fighting aspect, that the state exists to lower crime, protect people from the criminal element. And fourthly, that it prevents the lazy from fleecing his fellows, which is kind of an odd thing to say, but those are 4 main things. The first 3 being kind of the biggest ones. Natural law, maintaining order, preventing crime, and protecting us from the lazy. Now, depending on what kind of news you watch, you might hear similar sorts of things. When people talk about the government, they'll talk about the need to maintain order, the need to impose harsh penalties and heavy policing to reduce crime, and the need to protect people from the lazy. People who would be receiving stuff from the state, welfare, food stamps, etc. And so these are common arguments that we need the state to protect people from all this bad stuff. So how does she respond? Well, first reply is this. If the state really rests on natural law, and was a natural thing, then we shouldn't need all that machinery of government. We shouldn't need the guns, the prisons, the tasers, the spy equipment, etc., to maintain order. Because if it really was natural, we would need all that violence, etc. So she rejects the idea that it's based on this natural law. Now, what about the rather compelling argument about order? Because the sort of the usual argument is, going back to our good dead friend Tommy Hobbes, is that the state is essential to order. You don't have the state, the strong sovereign, you have chaos. And chaos is the worst thing imaginable. And so the usual argument is that the state maintains order. No state, no order, chaos, blood, fire, death, destruction, it's awful, everyone dies, game over. So what can the anarchists say about that? Well, one argument they give is that the state really does not maintain a good order. I mean, true, it has police forces that go and, beat people and shoot people and kill people. It maintains order through prisons and guns and violence and spying. But her argument is that's not really order. That's just sort of an imposed oppression. And so her argument essentially is that the state doesn't really bring the right sort of order. I mean, true, it does, crush and oppress people, it does shoot people, it does maintain fear, but it actually brings about not the right sort of order. And even that sort of order is pretty regularly disrupted. We can take historical examples, and more recent examples, that the attempts to police areas result in riots. The attempts to control people results in disobedience. But it is an interesting and important question. Is the state essential to maintaining order? And how do we bring about social order? We've tried to police our way out of many problems, stop and frisk, that sort of stuff, increase patrols. And a good question is, does that actually work? And it's a real, problem, today's society. So deciding how we maintain order, very important question. Can we kill our way to order, or do we have to be nicer about it? Third thing, diminishing crime. Another stock argument for the state is, kind of tying back into order, is the state is needed to diminish crime. Because otherwise, if the state wasn't there policing, there'd be all this crime. Now, of course, it does have a certain appeal. For example, you might say that if you take recent examples of if the police sort of go on, not really strike, but go on kind of like a work slowdown, crime increases. And we saw that, for example, in Baltimore. The claim was the police weren't sort of doing passive policing, and crime went up. And so you could argue that without the state, it'd be a criminal mess. Now, Goldman argues that in contrast, the state is actually the greatest criminal of all. Why? Well, the claim is that it commits murder through capital punishment, through policing, through war, that it robs through taxes, and so it violates privacy by spying. And so her claim is the state is the greatest criminal of all, killing more people than anyone else. And that it has failed to destroy even what has been created to oppose. So in regards to diminishing crime, her claim is the state is the biggest criminal. So if you want to get rid of like murder and theft and so forth, the biggest criminal would be the state. And secondly, it really hasn't done a good job, that the state has not eliminated crime. Now about the laziness point, her claim is that the state actually creates a system in which a idle class that does not work receives lots of benefits, and the state actually maintains that system, or so she claims. And so she thinks the state is actually a bad thing. So what's her solution? Well, basically this. Anarchy, of course. Her claim is to get rid of the awfulness of labor, get rid of the horrible, crappy jobs, the exploitation, the terrible pay, the jobs that people really hate. And this is done by, not surprisingly, getting rid of government, destroying the laws, and bringing about freedom, or so she claims. So again, not chaos. The goal is not to have chaos, fire, death, and destruction. The goal is to get rid of the government. And the claim is we can have order some other way, through non-coercive means. Now, one stock objection to that possibility rests on claims about human nature. If you go back again to our good dead friend Tommy Hobbes, he claimed that other political thinkers and social thinkers got it wrong, because they didn't really consider what people are like. And in Hobbes' view, people are, well, selfish, interested only in pleasure, and do not care at all about anyone else, totally self-focused. And so one objection against anarchism is basically the have you met us objection. The idea that people are just so horrible, you've got to crush them and keep them in line. Otherwise, we'll be total, monsters. Now, she has a couple of replies to this. One, that we really cannot speak of what human nature truly is, and she cites John Burroughs about looking at trying to figure out, say, animal behavior. And Burroughs figured out what may seem obvious now, but if you observe the behavior of animals that are like in cages, you're not getting their natural behavior. You're getting their in-cage behavior. And so one objection is that one might say, well, people behave badly now, and so they'd be far, far worse if we didn't have the state. Her reply is, well, we can't really say what people are really like, because we're all essentially living in cages now. And so we really can't truly say what human nature is. But of course, Goldman has faith that things would be better without the state. Or so she claims. There's a little ways to go. So anarchism is all about freeing us from government and creating social order. Now, of course, a good question is, so Emma, how do we make this happen? Suppose you buy into it. So yeah, anarchism sounds pretty cool. How do we bring about anarchy now? Well, one approach, of course, is through existing political machinery. We're told in all the famous voting campaigns that we should vote. And there was the weird one, vote or die type of deal. It sounds kind of threatening. Now, not surprisingly, the anarchists are not really big on the use of existing political machinery. Because again, they want to get rid of government. It's like going to the government saying, hey, we want to get rid of your jobs. Now, so why would that view? Well, first, she cites the anarchist Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau said that voting is essentially gambling. It's like playing the lottery. How so? When you play the lottery, you buy like a ticket or tickets, and you hope you win. And you get more tickets you buy, the slightly better your chance of winning, super marginal. But of course, winning the lottery is largely a matter of chance. Does your number come up? You have almost no control. And Thoreau says, by analogy, voting is kind of the same way. get one vote, like one ticket, you put it in, and you're hoping that through pure chance, your side will win. And so his view is that you shouldn't put your faith in voting because it's largely a matter of chance. And also, as he notes, the majority ends up, at least in theory, winning, but the majority is not always right, just or correct. And so Thoreau was critical of voting. And the anarchists, take a similar view. And so it's not going to be done by voting, or so she claims. Now, another option people appeal to is the use of representatives. So people might say, okay, we can vote in solutions. And Thoreau says, that's not really a very good way of doing it, because it's basically like gambling. And that's a very practical question. Suppose you don't like how the system is. You have concerns about things such as, well, take things that affect you directly. The high interest rate on student loans, the economy, which determines whether or not you get a job when you graduate. The economy, which determines how much interest you pay for credit cards, for your car loan, for your home loan, all that stuff. And one approach is to take, well, we should vote on that, fix that through voting. And a fair question to ask is, will that fix it? Will your chance of getting a job increase by voting a certain way? Will your interest rates on your credit cards and mortgages and student loans be changed by voting? Or something else. Another approach people make is getting representatives. Every politician who runs says, they're saying America's terrible condition, and if you just vote for them, they'll save us all. And they promise much. Now, a fair question is, will that work? Can we either be representatives ourselves, maybe you're considering running for office to change the world, to save everyone, or deciding who to vote for, which representative to pick to save the world, to make it a better place, to take back America from those Americans. Now, what Goldman says is this, to make a long story short. She says, basically there's two possibilities. If someone who is actually aiming to help people, to do good for the many, manages to get elected, which she thinks is pretty improbable, there's two possible outcomes. Outcome one, they stay true to their principles and accomplish nothing, or very little. They're defeated and thwarted at every turn. They have no impact. Possibility two, they become corrupted and just become just like everyone else. Which may be seen as kind of a cynical view, that either they're going to be principled but totally ineffective, or just become corrupt. Now, of course, it's a good question. When we're, because we had the election coming up in 2016, Bernie Sanders, for example, is running, claiming he's going to change the stuff. Actually, every candidate says, we're going to take back America, make everything great. And a fair question to ask is, if they're really true to their principles, will they stick with them and bring them about and be effective? Especially when you decide you want to vote for like Bernie or Donald. Donald's running. He's planning to just save everything and beat the Chinese and beat everybody, build a big wall. But anyways, probably make all these promises. If you vote for those people, will they stick to those principles? Or, and if they do so, will they be totally effective? Or will they just go more business as usual into corruption? And it's something we all get to decide in 2016. So, to roll on to the finish of this, what is her advocation? What she says is this: direct action. So the thing to do is basically, she advocates, as we saw before, she said, the charge of violence against anarchism is misplaced, not because she doesn't advocate violence, but because she thinks we should kill all the right people. So she advocates is direct action, taking action against the existing system to destroy it. Which is not surprising why anarchists used to be really frightening to people, because they were doing that stuff for real. So that's our brief look at anarchism, which promises to offer us a world free of government. Now, to support this, she points to some examples. Universal suffrage was not brought about by just waiting patiently in hopes of it happening, but brought about by direct action. Not violent, but by taking action. She points to American independence, which of course, the colonists said to the British, hey, nice of you to do this anymore, and then they had to resort to violence. And then of course the example of John Brown, violence. Then, of course, we have the Civil War, violence. And if you look at the history of trade unions in the United States, again, this is not something they typically discuss a lot in school, but the history of development of unions is a history of great violence, people being killed and blown up. And so our 40-hour work week, weekends, that kind of stuff, traces back directly to people getting killed. And we're just kind of heading that away now. So the anarchists claim through direct action will bring about this stuff. So we looked at basically three main approaches or wings. Hard right fascism, the state decides everything. More to the middle, John Stuart Mill, people should be free to do whatever doesn't harm other people, but we do have the right to impose. And then of course we got anarchism, which purports to essentially grant us in a way total liberty to get rid of all government authority. So we have the total state, and of course we got the other extreme, no state whatsoever. And that brings us to the end of Introduction to Philosophy. So now we'll proceed to the moment you've all been waiting for. If I need to shut up and turn to the extra credit, the philosophy game. Well, I'll still be talking, but I'll be talking.